Okay, I have a little paper here. Might be helpful. This is just a little paper I ran across here recently. Well, more than recently, a couple years ago, about studying the Bible. And we'll go over all this, but I want to hit like a couple things on it. Read this first paragraph. It says, some people make studying the Bible sound so easy, but that's a lie. The Bible is too ancient, too culturally removed from us for studying it to be easy. Bible study is a learned skill that followers of Jesus practice their whole lives. The complications of studying the Bible should not deter us from reading it. Rather, they should intrigue us and compel us to dig deeper. So just want to talk about a couple things that will help us in reading the Bible. If you look over, I'm not going to read all these. You have it, and you can look at them. And if you have any questions, you can bring them back to Kevin next week, and he'll answer all of them.
I'll have answers for all of them.
Okay, there you go. But I do want to talk about, it talks about the original audience on number 7 on the back. I want to talk about that. Contemporary followers of Jesus are not the original audience of Scripture. That means you and I, we're not the original audience. These letters were not written for us. Each verse of the Bible is penned for a specific ancient audience in mind. Even though, but here's the key now, get this. Even though the Bible is not written directly to us, it is written for us. And it's written for us in the sense that we as Jesus followers need to study the truth of Scripture because it transcends time. So we just want to talk about that a little bit this evening, and hopefully, if that sounds a little wordy, maybe some of the stuff we talked about can help us make sense of what we're trying to say. The Bible, the way it was written, we know it was written like a couple thousand years ago when Jesus lived, right? Mm-hmm. On planet Earth. So in bodily form. And so it was written right after that, probably within 30 years or so after his death. Much of what we have in the New Testament was starting to be compiled, and it was compiled in a less than 100-year period. And some people say probably around a 60-year period. So what we have was written in a relatively short amount of time, but over 1900 years ago. So it was written to a different people that lived in a different place. And so we need to just understand that. And that's what we want to highlight, a few things about that. If I was to ask you, how were you taught to read the letters of the Bible? And what I mean by letters, or some people call them epistles, in the back part of the New Testament, there are like 13 letters that Paul wrote. Stuff like Romans, what we know is 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, also Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st, 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon. Those are all, basically everyone believes that Paul is the author of all of those books. And they're called the letters because they're letters that he wrote, or, well, we'll see, it wasn't only him with a team of people wrote them and sent them to different churches. And you gotta figure the churches weren't like churches we know today. They were house churches, small groups of people that would meet, like a big Bible study group that would meet in someone's home all across a region. And so that's what these letters were written and sent to a region for all the people to get together and hear what Paul wrote. So anyway, but how were you taught to read those? Were you taught in a specific way? Well, here's how you ought to read this. Or were you ever taught? Or did somebody just say, hey, you ought to read this stuff sometime?
Yeah.
Is that, well, okay. Oftentimes, I know for me personally, I think of reading the Bible, I think of doing a devotion. Like having some quiet time, like people say, you ought to get up early in the morning before you do anything else, pray, get your Bible, read some of it, you know, and we're big these days, you know, don't, you know, I know you're real busy, you don't have a lot of time, just get what you can, read you a paragraph, just read till you get something that God puts on your heart for the day. And so that's basically how people are taught. But what I think this challenges us is that might not be the best way to read these letters. And we can probably find a better way, as we're going to start studying Ephesians, a better way to read Ephesians than to do that. Because when we just read, we might read one or two lines and we're like, oh, there it is. That's for me today. You know, pray without ceasing. There you go. That's all I need to know. Thank you, God. And you write something down in your journal and you go on. But why did it say pray without ceasing? What was going on at the time? You know, so there's some important stuff that we need to do. I mean, I'm assuming that we can relate to reading that way, that sometimes we don't take the time to. Does anybody take the time when you read one of these letters, like the ones I mentioned, do you read it from front to back?
I have some, but not very often.
Yeah, I know. I wasn't told that was like a super important thing to do.
Right.
Now some of the letters, you know, if you think of like Colossians or Philippians or something like that, they are like 4 chapters. You could probably read it in, I don't know, say 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So you could, but I wasn't ever told that was that important. The problem with that, though, is, unfortunately, it leads us to misapplying a lot of Scripture, like taking one verse and applying it to our life, or saying, and it sounds like God's talking directly to you, so surely you should just do exactly what it says, because it sounds like it says, you ought to be doing this. Well, he must be talking to me, because that's what it said right there, right?
Yeah.
But we got to remember, it wasn't written directly to us. And we need to understand the whole thing. So anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's a letter, and if Kevin wrote a letter to John, if Kevin typed this out and say, to John from Kevin, would you read from right here to right here and say, that's enough, that's a pretty good sentence right there, I'm just going to stop?
Well, I have Crystal read it because I can't read.
Well, the point is, you wouldn't say, Crystal, I just want you to read this part right here. Don't read me that part, we'll do that over the next 2 weeks. But you'd probably say, no, I want to know everything Kevin said to me. I want you to read that to me. I want you to read this page to me. And when we only read a line or two, sometimes we come up with inaccurate conclusions as to what we need to do. We don't do other stuff like that. So we just need to understand it's a form of literature that is called, it's an ancient letter. And we wouldn't, you know, we read certain things in certain ways. Like how about a poem?
Yeah.
A poem. Well, do you read just one line in a poem and say, you know what, that meant a lot to me. I'm just going to quit right now. We don't do that. You're like, you know, because if you did that, you'd be, roses are red, violets are blue. No more. Don't give me any more. That is good. I just want to remember that. But you'll misapply it, because if you just read that part, you're and say, well, we know that roses are red because it says it right there.
Yeah.
So if you bring one of those yellow ones in here, it's not a real rose because roses are red.
Yeah.
If you bring a pink rose in here and try to tell me it's a rose, I'm going to tell you you're a liar because it says roses are red. See? And sometimes we can do that with the Bible. And the bad part is we miss the whole point of the poem if only we read roses are red and violets are blue. Because the last part goes something like, sugar is sweet.
Sugar is sweet, and so
and you are too. The point of the poem is, I'm telling you, you're sweet.
Yeah.
It's not trying to tell me that roses are red. It's
Yeah.
trying to tell me that I'm sweet.
Yeah.
Or who it's written to is sweet. So we just have to think about that when we start reading the Bible. We need to understand also that we do get theology, like important God things from these letters. But at its core, the reason Paul wrote them is because he was a pastor writing to a congregation. So more than teaching them theology, he was helping them get through some circumstances, some trials, like when you go through some rough times, or you just got something wrong, or you're acting insensitive to other people, you're fighting and feuding with each other. And he's writing to address that. He's not really writing to give us big thoughts of theology. He's really writing as a pastor, encouraging people to live the way Christ would want
Well,
them
that's
to.
just like when me and Crystal started listening to the Bible back in January. We started, I think, from the Old Testament. Now we're into the New Testament. And it's like, when we got started, because we've missed a few days, and so we're kind of behind. And it's like, I asked her, I says, we're just now getting into
For us to do in our culture. In other words, things like Paul, 7 different times in his letters, he says, I want you to greet one another with a holy kiss. Boys and girls, men and women, everybody's just kissing, right? Love you, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
We don't do that. That's written in a culture where that's what they did. There was a specific reason also that Paul wrote, I don't let women speak in a service. He was writing that to the Corinthians for a specific reason. It doesn't mean that that we don't let a woman ever speak in a service that we hold. So we just got to realize that everything it says, it doesn't mean that everything is for us. Now that makes some people really nervous, and I understand why, because you can say, well, where does that stop and who do you listen to? Because anybody could say, well, yeah, it says in the Bible, but that don't mean we have to do it.
Yeah.
So I understand why that would make someone nervous, so you kind of do have to rely on some people that have gone before you that have thoughtfully and know a lot about the culture that it was written in, and have done a lot of word studies, because it's also written on your paper. It talks about it was written in a language, Old Testament. What you said you've been listening to, that was written even longer ago, up to 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, maybe some of it. So that is a long time, and written in a language that we don't have the exact English words to translate to it. So it's really difficult. So we have to be careful, and we have to lean on people that do that know how to do that maybe a little better, know the language a little better than we do. But what it should do, it should challenge us to have some really good practices. So let me talk to you about this letter thing again. I want you to consider how it would have been written, who it would have been written to, and how the audience would have received it. You think of a letter that was from Paul, like Ephesians. You ever heard of the painter Rembrandt? Okay. anyway, famous painter. There's this picture of Paul. You can look it up on your phone there. Put Rembrandt and Paul. Rembrandt painting of Paul, or the Apostle Paul. And it has an old man kind of sitting at his desk like this with his hand on his head and a pen, you know, and he's ready to go down to a scroll. It's a famous painting. But here's the deal. He's sitting like in a European study. And the thing is, that's not Paul. That wouldn't have been how Paul wrote this. He didn't have a quiet office space that he retreated to write these letters. Paul was a traveling evangelist. You read about that in the book of Acts. He traveled around with groups of people like Barnabas and Silas and Timothy and Luke and people like that, Titus. They traveled around and taught about Jesus and started these small churches everywhere. And he also had a job as a tent maker. So he didn't take pay when he was going from, if he stopped in Thessalonica, he didn't let them pay him, but other people might help support him. But he worked really hard to make money, and some of the others traveling with him would work hard to help pay the bills. And so he would, and so a lot of what they would do then was, as they were walking along from place to place, they would have had these things called parchments, which is like an old school notepad, and they would write down like, well, we just got this word about what's happening in Corinth. So we need to think about what we want to write to the Corinthians. They'd be talking about stuff like that as they walked along. And they would maybe jot some ideas down. They would collect Old Testament passages of Scripture to put in it. They would collect poems. They would collect sayings of the day that the church was saying. Hymns that they were singing. All these things like that are in Paul's letters, and he would have a group of people that they would be working on that together, and they might be working on it for several months before they got together and actually hired a scribe or a secretary to come in and write this, to actually pen this. And they would get out all their parchments, all their notepads and stuff, and they would read it off, and the scribe would write it down, and there'd probably be something like, all right, now tell me what I got so far, and go for it. And then they'd put in another piece that they had already worked on. That's why it says over in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 13, Paul is writing to Timothy, and he says, when you come, bring the cloak that I left at Carpus. So bring me my coat. So it's apparently about getting cold weather. I left it with Carpus at Troas, so bring that to me. And he says, also bring the books, what we would know as scrolls, and the parchments. And that's the old school notepads that we're talking about that they used. And I was listening to a guy teach on that. They were actually made, a lot of those were made of wax, that they would make impressions on them. And that was how they
Scratch out the letters.
Scratch it out, because they might not necessarily have ink and whatever, your feather pen or whatever that they used in the day there to do that. That was just fascinating to me to hear that. But anyway, that's kind of how they would go about writing a letter like we're going to study. Again, they would have been thinking about the current condition of the church. Was it a healthy church? Was it a sick church? I mean, in the terms of spiritual health. Were they being persecuted? Was people coming against them and fining them for meeting, or upset with them for gathering together in the name of Jesus? You know, they would take all that into consideration as they put that together. Now, after it would have been penned, then they would have had somebody deliver it. So, you know, if if Kevin over here would have been the Apostle Paul, you know, and you'd have been the scribe, Jimmy, he'd have been telling you this, and maybe Silas would have been chiming in. I think it was one of the books. I can't remember if it's Ephesians or not. We can look that up if you want to. But it says the way they started their letter, they didn't say to the Ephesians. They said a lot of times they'd say that this is Paul the apostle, and this is from Silas and Timothy. I don't know if I can't remember how the first verse of Ephesians starts, but anyway. But that's the way they started their letters, and so you would pin it, and then we might have John here. He might be the deliverer of it, and what he would do, he would get it when it was a completed work, and he would take it to the place like Ephesus and say, and all the churches would gather together, and he would read it to them. That was so you heard the whole thing in one setting, and probably almost none of them, the general people in those congregations, because a lot of them couldn't read, but especially the women, but they couldn't have read the letter. They would have just sat down and listened to it from front to back, from beginning to end, the whole thing at one time, and that's how they would have. They had done that. So you see that, so it would have been very different than what we have today. And
Just women, couldn't they couldn't speak out or what?
well, they wouldn't have read it because they weren't, they didn't educate the women in that culture, in that time period, to that effect. But right here, this one says from Paul. It says to the churches, verse 2, to the churches in Galatia. Grace and peace to you from God our Father, the Lord Jesus Christ, who gave himself for our sins to rescue us from the present evil age according to the will of God our Father, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. Now, that's a prayer. That might be his prayer. That might have been a prayer that they had stashed away on one of their a prayer of the day, like we have certain prayers. But anyway, but here, let this verse 6, we get a little, it's some low-hanging fruit here. This is easy to pick off what's going on, because why is he writing this letter to them? Verse 6, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. So, you know, we're, you're abandoning the gospel or the good news of Jesus for another one. That's going to be, we'll find out as we go on. That's the point. Everything he's writing about in this letter is because of that right there.
Mm-hmm.
That they're turning to a different gospel. And so you know, if you're thinking like a detective, you know, one of the first questions is, I wonder what this other gospel was.
Yeah.
You know, is it a really big problem? How are we going to search this out? You know, that idea. So, you know, you just kind of think of, when you find that verse, you're like, all right, let's read on and think about this and see what it says. It talks about no gospel at all. It's throwing people into confusion. It's perverting the good news of Christ. Verse 8, even if an angel or somebody from heaven would preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be cursed, he says. We've already said, and I say it again, if anybody's preaching the gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. Now, am I trying to win approval of human beings? Nope. I'm talking for God, is what he's saying. I'm a servant of Christ. And now here, listen to this, verse 11. It says, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preach to you is not of human origin, nor did I receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus. So what he's saying is, what I told you is not a lie. I didn't make up what I told you. right? He said, you know, it didn't come to me by man. I didn't make it up. But why would he have said that? It makes you think that maybe somebody else was telling them that what Paul was telling them is not all the gospel, or it's not the whole gospel, or let me tell you some more stuff so you'll know some. So something like that is going on here for Paul to write about this. That's what I mean by mirror reading. It kind of like what we got to look at what's jumping out at us. So Paul goes into the rest of this first chapter, and he just says, here's what I did. You know, Christ revealed this to me. I actually went up to Jerusalem. He said the only one I talked to was Jesus' brother James. Actually, in the original text, it calls him Jacob, but that's James. And he said then he went off in the desert. He had some period of time. I think it says about 3 years here. It talks about that he spent in the desert, and then he went back and he met with, who to say, James and Peter and John. Then at verse 18, after 3 years, I went up to get acquainted with Cephas, or Peter, and stayed 15 days. I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother. Okay, and I assure you that before God that what I'm writing you is no lie. Oh, and then he went to Syria and Cilicia. So he just kind of goes into this personal story of what he did after he got this revelation from Jesus Christ. And then he goes over into what is our second chapter, and he says, after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem. This time I took Barnabas. I took Titus along also. And I went in response to a revelation and a meeting privately with those who were esteemed as the leaders. I presented to them the gospel that I preach among the Gentiles. So the gospel he's saying, I didn't make up, I got from Jesus. I took it to Jerusalem, to Jesus' brother, and to Peter himself, and I ran it by them. And it says, when they were there, not even Titus, who was with us, was compelled to be circumcised, even though he was a Greek. So that means he wasn't a Jewish man, Titus, and he went in with the apostles, and he didn't feel compelled to be circumcised. Wonder that's revealing something to us about why this is written. This matter arose because some of the false believers had infiltrated our ranks. So false brothers that were saying they were followers of Christ come in and said, hey, this isn't right. Here's what it says. It says that this had infiltrated our ranks, and the freedom that we have in Jesus Christ, and they tried to make us slaves. We didn't give in to them. So there, you see something there. If you read through that verse 4, they were upset about Titus not being circumcised, and they were trying to make them slaves. He says slaves again to the law, and Christ had set them free. And so that is what he's talking about. That's our aha moment. It's a false brothers speaking a false gospel. They're adding stuff to this message about Jesus, and you got to do more than believe and trust in Jesus. You got to be circumcised too. So see, it's starting, you know, to unravel here. It goes on down in verse 11. It says, when Cephas, or Peter, came to Antioch, I had to oppose him to his face. He stood condemned, because it says when when he was with the Gentiles, he was eating with them. They were in close quarters with one another. They were just best friends. They were brothers in Christ. But then when some of these false brothers came in with this false gospel, Peter pulled away and like, yeah, I don't have anything to do with you. He was being a hypocrite.
Yeah.
And that would have been a pretty big deal for Paul to stand up to Peter.
Yeah.
Peter, the rock on which the church is founded, you know. That's what Jesus said. So now you're starting to get an idea of why Paul wrote this letter.
Yeah.
There's people coming in and trying to say, hey, what Paul's saying, that isn't a real deal. You can believe in Jesus, but you also need to be just like us Jews. And Paul called it out. And so the false gospel arises around this ethnic difference. You know, you're something other than we are. We're Jews and you're not. And so the false gospel comes up about this, where it raises who you are as a Jew above the unity that we should all have as we're all on the level playing field before God. Just because I'm a Jew, it don't make me more important. Just because I'm circumcised don't make me more important. That's a false gospel, and that's why he's telling this to them, because he knows how important it is for them to stay united. So when you read verses like over in chapter 3 and verse 28, where it says, so in Christ there's no Scythian, or how does that read, verse 28? There's no slave or free. Let me get over the third chapter. Somebody else has 3:28.
There's neither Jew nor Greek,
Jew nor Greek,
slave nor free, male nor female. We are all one in Christ Jesus.
Okay, so he's saying, hey, the real God. So when we read stuff like that, we know why he's saying it. He's saying that because everybody's united in Christ. It don't matter who you are. If you're a man or a woman, if you're a Jew or a Gentile, if you're a slave, or if you're a slave owner, you are on a level playing field before God. And then there's a famous verse over in chapter 5, verse 1, that says, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Well, why did he write that? He wrote that because he's telling them, don't fall for this circumcision mumbo jumbo. You've been freed in Jesus Christ, where you don't have to keep these laws to be right with God. You believe in him. And so, see, those are the kinds of things that are highlighted. Just a couple things are highlighted on this paper I give you. That really helps us to understand the letters we read a little bit better. If we read them in their entirety, we hear them like the culture that heard them then. We are able to put things together and realize that not everything, we have to be careful applying certain things to our circumstances from the letter to the Galatians, because we're not dealing with this circumcision issue here. We're not fighting about that.
Yeah.
We're not being thrown up on our ear about that. So we just have to look at it with some wisdom. And kind of read as a detective and kind of put those things together. So when you read through Ephesians, I would encourage you to turn it on if you want to listen to it. And listen to the whole thing a couple times over the next week. And just get a feel for why it was being written. What's some of the important things he's talking about. I got one little paragraph that might give you a little bitty hint here. Just give you a little introduction. It says, in the book of Ephesians, we see how the gospel story affects believers' everyday lives. God the Father planned throughout history for Jesus to create a multi-ethnic community of followers. I mean, people from all over the world, comprised of Jews and non-Jews. These followers form a covenant family. Yeah, we're a family. Family of God promised to Abraham. They live in unity as one body in their families, neighborhoods, and churches because of God's grace. That's what he was telling to these people. And hopefully you can kind of uncover some of that and see that as we go through it. Because if we know that, we can be a little bit more careful about how we apply some of this stuff to our own lives.
Yeah.